actually, reputable economists are recommending moderately high inflation targets, not really as a way of repudiating debt, but as a way of encouraging borrowing. Now, if you want to get a -5% interest rate, one way to do it is to have a 0 interest rate plus 5% expected inflation. And of course, I myself have argued that very vigorously for Japan 10 years ago, and it never happened. Is there a real prospect that that's going to happen as a deliberate policy? I don't. But maybe I should break this into two parts. There's one school of thought that looks at the balance sheets of the central banks, looks at the debt of the countries, and says that inflation is inevitable given all of this. I believe that's entirely wrong. Although the balance sheets of the central banks have vastly expanded, they're itching to go back to normal at the first sign of recovery. Probably too eager to go back to normal at the first sign of recovery. If you look at the Federal Reserve in particular, again, I know which I know best, the numbers aren't what you think they are. If you look at the Fed's balance sheet and you say that the monetary base has gone up by an incredible amount, but that's primarily bank reserves at the Fed, on which the Fed now pays interest. And what you see there is not actually a monetary expansion, it's actually the Fed borrowing from the banks and then lending to the private sector. It's the Fed acting as a financial intermediary of last resort. The Fed doing the job that the banks are not willing to do right now. So it's not actually a monetary expansion, and they will reverse it at the first sign of possibility. The idea that some future U.S. government might seek to inflate away its debts, well, such things have happened even in advanced countries, but I think it's fairly remote right now. There's enormous opposition to doing it. I just don't see that as a story. And in fact, I'm really very worried about deflation. I didn't bring that into the talk proper, but in the medium term, one way to look at this is that in the United States, the output gap right now is almost as high as it was at its peak, post-war peak in 1982. The real question is why isn't the United States going to inflation targeting, and why am I not making a call for it? I'm not making a call for it because clearly it would not be accepted at this point. It's not in the range of things. You know, we have an inflation target in the United States, more or less official, of 2%. And there's a really good intellectual case for raising that to 4% or 5% or even 6%, which is what Ken Rogoff is saying. But that kind of target doesn't work unless you can make it credible. You have to be able to make a credible commitment to make it happen. And in order to make a credible commitment, you have to have a sufficient number of key policymakers willing to accept this as a desirable course of action. Kind of a funny thing. You can't just go in there and announce it. Ben Bernanke said, I want 6%. There's no guarantee that he'll be reappointed next year. And in fact, if he said that, there's a pretty good guarantee that he would not be reappointed next year. So things would actually have to be worse for this to get position. I mean, I've had, at the moment, there's still widespread hope that more conventional policy measures will be triggered. That stimulus, intervention in the financial markets, and a bit of good luck will pull us out. So we're not ready for really radical policies. At this point, senior people whom I respect enormously suggest, Paul Volcker is still gets very angry at the notion that we've even accepted 2% as an inflation target, and I don't think he or a lot of people who follow his thought would be willing to accept a higher target yet. So it's a question of timing. I will come back to inflation targeting as a necessary tool if this thing does in fact drag on as long as I fear it will. We're still stuck in the doldrums, let's say the middle of next year, which I unfortunately fear we might be. Then we'll be able to talk a lot more radical stuff. But right now those green shoots, whatever they are, have actually had the effect of kind of paralyzing any further policy moves until we see how it all turns out. Yeah. The Chinese central banker. I would probably try to resign sometime in the near future. The Chinese they accumulated $2 trillion of very low And 70% of it is dollars, which is almost certainly a negative return asset. And from their point of view, I mean, I'm not being facetious here. I mean, seriously, the dollar probably needs to depreciate once the crisis abates, needs to depreciate against the other major currencies. Because after all, we have a trade deficit, and the Europeans do not. I don't really, nobody knows quite what the thinking that went into the policy that led to that accumulation of loss. My view is actually has been that the Chinese acquired their stash the same way famously that Britain acquired its empire in a state of absence of mind. But now it's very difficult. Whoever is on the spot when China has to realize those capital losses is going to be in a very awkward position. A lot of what we hear from China about new global currency, all of that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the face of it. And I think it's really the Reserve Bank of China looking for some way that somebody will rescue them from the consequences of their past investment decisions, and it's not going to happen. So there's no good way out. They're going to take, in effect, maybe able to disguise that one way or another, China's going to lose at the least several $100 billion on the central bank's portfolio, which is not something any central bank should want to be around when it happens.